जागने वाले किसी बांग तरह से दिल हो.
If this war ends, how much time do you think it will take for rebuilding of Gaza? And would Palestinians be able to survive during that time without displacement?
A lot depends on the Trump situation. I think that one hope, to put it in very much inverted commas, was that the Iran aggression would be a quid pro quo against stopping the Gaza genocide. I think it's impossible to make an assessment about whether that is likely to happen because the Trump situation is so unpredictable, as we've seen, deliberately unpredictable, that is impossible to see what the calculation is. Although I think, as I've said, that the evidence of Trump supporting Netanyahu in the Israeli domestic scene with the corruption charge is not a good sign in terms of pressuring Netanyahu to wind up the Gaza genocide. Also, when there is a ceasefire, let's say that it will happen, what it really means in terms of how it will be that much different from what's happening at the moment is another valid question. Because if it just means that the daily bombing of Gaza will be stopped, but Israel is still able to bomb Gaza every week, and still has freedom of operational movement along large swathes of the territory, it will be obviously, yes, a massive buffet against the sort of genocidal program, but it won't feel like that much of a ceasefire in another sense to the civilians in Gaza, because the precarity of living there will still be high. The sense and reality of ongoing threat will still be high. So what I mean is, when I was there, for example, for the first time in 2012, the bombing could happen anytime. You never knew when there was going to be a flare-up in violence. And that was like a honeymoon period in comparison to now, because of course now it's hard to even survive in terms of food. So if Israel stops its regular daily bombing but falls back to a more seasonal bombing, but still maintains a massive besiegement campaign, it won't feel that much different in a sense, comparing the new situation with what Palestinians have been used to for 3 calendar years versus what happened before. And so it really just depends on what that ceasefire means. In terms of the dynamics of the ceasefire, in terms of how it might come about, I don't see how Hamas, looking at sort of objectively at its negotiating strategy and the reality of the situation, how they could possibly agree to a ceasefire at this stage, which doesn't involve a proper Israeli withdrawal. But at the same time, I don't see enough pressure on Israel, given the current sphere, for Israel to feel like it needs to agree to that. And that's why I feel that the ceasefire question at this point is very, very hypothetical. And that's why I do feel that the what is the ceasefire and how much of a ceasefire is it is the key question. Because if Israel is able to draw down its operation to something that feels maintainable indefinitely, then there won't need to be a ceasefire. And in many ways, it's not in the Israeli interests to have a ceasefire, like a all stop, organized stop to the genocide, because actually having an ongoing conflict serves various strategic goals. So it's a terrible thing to have to say, but I just don't objectively see at present that a ceasefire is going to happen in the next month or two. But obviously, I hope that something changes, perhaps while we've been on this call.
Yeah, because I looked at different times, some say it will take 5 years, the rebuilding process. Some say it will take up to 10 years. So, these are different.
It, Yeah, completely. If there is a ceasefire, let's say there is some miraculous manifest pressure from the Europeans, led by Spain, let's say, and they decide they're going to go all in against Trump and put diplomatic pressure on. The EU is going to stick its head above the parapet and go all in on calling complicity out and go all in on, let's say, the genocide word and this sort of thing. And let's say Israel is forced to a ceasefire, the rebuilding is going to take decades, as has already been calculated, and cost an unfathomable amount of money. And part of the problem is the destruction zone that has been created is itself toxic. We're not starting in terms of building on foundations of a car park. We're talking on building on a war zone with not only the remnants of human life still buried underneath all of the bombarded buildings, but unexploded ordnance, the water supply, for example, being destroyed. We're basically talking about starting from scratch after clearing up all of the toxic mess. And at that point, if international parties are brought in, which they would be, because Israel's never going to pay for that sort of thing, that's not going to happen in terms of the current Israeli political context situation, that will involve international bodies coming in. But if international bodies are coming in, it's very hard to stop evidence collection for war crimes. They're almost closely linked in practical reality. And so I think that Israel will be very reticent to allow that to happen. At this stage, as I say, it's a terrible thing to say, but I just don't see it happening, to be honest.